All right, welcome back to another episode of the Unframe of Mind Show. I know it's been a little while. I've been taking a lot of time focusing on the Patriot Punkcast, which focuses on local Tennessee politics. But I do like to get into the weeds on some of this more philosophical stuff. And I was recently listening to an episode of Timcast, and this gentleman who goes by the name of Fabian Liberty on his channel was getting in there, getting dirty in the debate, and it was just a lot of fun to listen to. So I reached out to him and figured we'd have him on to discuss some topics on anarchy and maybe address some of the common concerns that I hear come up in quite a few debates. And I don't get an opportunity to talk about this quite enough. But with that being said, let's jump into it. Hey, what's going on, Mr. Scott?
Oh, I'm just I'm having a blast. Yeah, that Tim Pool show was awkward. It was weird. It was a lot of fun. It was a surreal moment. Kind of my first breakthrough foray into like a real famous people, going somewhere, I remember at one point I was hanging out and there was like some girl there that was like, oh, I'm just here, because I'm going to hit Tim Pool's skater buddies. I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then like 10 minutes later, she's like, yeah, I remember I had to give a speech to the prime minister of China, about the, for the Olympic qualifier stuff. And I was like, oh, I'm in a room full of people that are better than me. What is going on? I'm happy to see anarchism, true anarchism, of the right-wing libertarian variety, pierce through the veil a little bit and get into those spaces. Right. It's needed now.
When you say true anarchism, you're differentiating that from something else. I suspect I know what, but what do you mean by that when you say true versus, I guess, not true anarchism?
Well, I would say that there are a lot of forms of anarchism by that label, but anytime something falls into contradiction, it is by definition not true. And so I'd say the philosophies of like, the black bloc, Antifa types, the anarcho-communists, once people are critically engaged and they have class consciousness, we'll all live on a commune and share our property together and sing kumbaya is not commiserate with reality. It's not true anarchism, as I would put it. But they have the same label as us, and so it's important to differentiate, even if it is a bit insulting.
Yeah, I get that a lot, and I've noticed that the terms used so loosely that I think it's really muddied the waters and confused a lot of people in terms of what it actually is. And I even try to post at least once a year, like, y'all got it super confused. You're overthinking it. Like, it simply just means no rulers. That's it. Everything else that falls from that is what it is. I don't know why we have to overcomplicate things. And to hear the like you said, the black bloc, Antifa, and all them try to use anarchy, I'm like, wait a minute, if they're going to sing Kumbaya in the end, do they know the words yet? Have they started there and learned the actual lyrics to Kumbaya? And do they understand that it is a religious song? Already right off the bat, just not going to work. But
yeah, for sure.
In general, part of the reason I've been focusing more so on the Patriot Punkcast show is because I kind of had an epiphany, if you will, that focusing on local federal level politics, there's only so much power that the average man and woman has to affect change over that. But if we focus on local politics, even as anarchists, we actually might be able to move the needle in terms of shrinking the size of government. And that's kind of part of why I personally have agreed to work with some of the politicians in the local area, because as long as they're on the same page in terms of shrinking government, and I figure once we've shrunk it to such a size that we can finally, wet finger it out like a candle, then we can start battling back and forth. But it seems like mostly I find allegiance in the right wing. And is that something you find as well?
Yes and no. I would say that the right fancies themselves to not be socialist. So they're more open to hearing critiques against socialism and state abuses of power through that lens. But it really, like, if I was an anarchist with the same philosophy that I am now, when Tipper Gore and the Democrats were trying to, get rid of heavy metal and get rid of, and saying that D&D was satanic and things like that, I think the shoe would be on the other foot, right? So it really is more about cultural sway of power, I think. And so I do think we're in an interesting shift where the right is going to begin to try, at least attempt to excise libertarian thought from their movements as coalitions of possibly the center become more receptive. And we kind of, I don't want to say we have to be a chameleon, but we have to be honest that like someone isn't an ally unless they're an anarchist. Like they're they're fair weather friends. And we you want to use that space to plant seeds for ideas, right? And I think we've done that successfully in the right. You look at any podcast or something, the beginning of political podcasts, you'll never hear somebody doing a right-wing podcast use the term the state. You'll never hear them say, well, I'm a little libertarian myself, like these copes, but some of our language has spread through, some of our things have spread through, and we have a really long uphill battle against us. That's kind of where the name Fabian Liberty comes from, because I want to reverse the Fabian society strategy that incremental change is, I think, the only way that practically it will work. But I also think it's important that we don't doomer pill, that we don't black pill. And then we realize that the ideology that we're discussing right now, which is, anarcho-capitalism or libertarianism as set out by Rothbard, was 6 people in a room 50 years ago. And the fact that there are all of these podcasts and shirts and memes and flags and, the LP as a political party, all of its fucking flaws included, right? Like the fact that that's even a part of any conversation is, I think, a huge, big deal. But we do have to realize that we're toddlers, right? Like that we're in the infancy of this. And so the strategy, as far as I see it, and potentially as far as you see it, is, to understand that great men plant seeds for which the shade of trees they'll never sit in. Like this is probably a lifelong or longer pursuit, but I'm okay with that.
Oh yeah. We're never going to see. And I've kind of along the same lines of like Stefan Molyneux, who talks about this is probably a multi-generational change that we're not going to see. And we're never going to see it, you and I would love to see things start to take place. And I think you made an excellent point that we actually have seen some of those seeds take root in some minds, especially as the government continues to show its ass in these last few years, and we start to see, wow, they really don't have our interest in mind, and what other alternatives are there, and what's this anarchy thing? I haven't quite got to the point where I've had people asking me, hey, how about anarchy? But it is neat to see that it's more culturally acceptable to talk about it right now, but it's not quite culturally acceptable to implement it yet. People still aren't quite ready to let go of the state as
the ideas are trickling down, right? Because like no one comes up to you and says, well, what about anarchism, right? What about anarcho-capitalism? What about anarcho-objectivism, right? Which is a small group of us are kind of burgeoning out in that domain. But like nobody says that. But if you were to ask somebody, we should abolish the FBI, it's just a corrupt organization, 10 years ago, every Republican would have looked at you like you were a psychopath that just wanted, criminals and terrorists everywhere. But if you go to a Republican now and say we should get rid of the FBI, they're like, I'm listening. You know what I mean? Like they're not necessarily saying based, but some of them are, and some of them are going, well, what are your arguments? Right. And I think that's can be a big win for us, at least in some domain. Because I don't think without anarchists, people wouldn't seriously even bring that up in the conversation.
Absolutely. And the advent of the internet and its ability to spread ideas so much faster than they previously would, where, like you said before, it was 6 guys in a room versus now it's like 6 guys spread across every city across the country, and we start to make inroads. There was something you said earlier regarding the Republican side starting to push away, trying to differentiate themselves from the center. And insofar as I wanted to say, I've noticed this trend, especially here in the last day or two, where there was recently a post that I made about the right trying to ban porn, and everybody's like, ban porn, and I'm like, no, guys, come on. I don't know if you've participated in that particular discussion at all or seen it even. But I'm just like, so there's certain points where I have to call out the right for their silly shit. And It doesn't make me a lot of friends, especially as I start to build the inroads into the right. So I'm still trying to figure out how to navigate that, because it's really difficult to not to not just stand there and laugh them and send the clown emojis like I would with somebody who's clearly on the left and clearly lost the plot, right?
So this is where a unique problem that libertarianism starts to butt its head. So here's what's really, I think, happening in this domain is, and this is kind of why I kind of brought up anarcho-objectivism, though I don't want to get into the weeds on that, because now it'll be even more niche thing. But
sure.
Just keep it in mind, right? Is that libertarianism, as set down by Rothbard, what we would consider to be anarchism or voluntarism or anarcho-capitalism, is what is it, right? What is libertarianism? And what libertarianism is, in short, is a descriptive philosophy of natural law. Now, what does that mean for the normies, right? What that means is there are two types of claims. There are descriptive claims and there are prescriptive claims. Descriptive describes something, right? This cup is white. This cup is blue. It is describing reality, right. Natural law. What is prescriptive? Prescriptive is what you should do, what you ought do, in short, right? Mm-hmm. You ought have a duty to your neighbor. You ought, let an older lady cross the sidewalk. You ought to take care of your children by educating them, whatever it may be. These are moral prescriptive claims. And so one of the biggest weaknesses and strengths of, but I think weaknesses, is that libertarianism doesn't tell you what you ought to do. It doesn't say you should do this because it's good. What it does is it says, do not aggress. And the reason it says do not aggress is because only a system of non-aggression is ethically justifiable. Only a system of ethics can be a system of ethics if it is conflict reducing, right? If it's not creating conflict, but instead as a pathway to reduce conflict. And that is how humans create rules to live together, to reduce those conflicts. Now, the reason I bring all this up, I know I got kind of in the weeds, but the reason I bring this up is this becomes extremely important when we start talking about how to use power in the spaces of what appears to be morally degenerate things. Is that Christian conservatives, Christian nationalists, Christian populists of other varieties, they see libertarianism and they're like, that's fine and dandy, but prostitution, porn, drug use, these things are evil. And your ideology has no answer for it. And they're kind of right. But they're comparing apples to oranges, because libertarianism doesn't tell you that you should do something against them, but also doesn't tell you that you shouldn't not do something against them other than grab the guns paid for by taxes and go put these people in cages, right? And so it becomes very, very difficult to have that conversation with conservatives when we talk about porn, because the moment we start saying, and that's just one example of a big domain of things, right? But using your porn example, it's like, porn is bad. Porn is destructive towards the mind. It is destroying relationships in some way. It is creating sexual degeneracy. It is creating a sense of anomie or normlessness by creating, certain degenerate behaviors to be normative when they are not normative. It is doing and the access to it, especially of children, is doing a world of unmeasurable psychological harm to our society. And the typical conservative answer is use power to stop this thing because it's bad. And then we say, well, you can't do that. And like, but you just said it's fucking bad. What do you mean? And so this is where we as anarchists have to really needle a thread here and recognize that we have to sell them on how we get rid of something without state power. And that is an ought that isn't a libertarian ought. That is not part of libertarianism, right? Libertarianism has nothing to say about it. And so I think that specific domain that you brought up is really important. I think it's probably the greatest weakness of libertarianism as we attempt to try and showcase it is, well, what would you do? Oh, well, I'd come together, I'd create a society like the Amish, and I'd ban that shit. And they're like, well, if you'd ban it, why don't you ban it now? And it's like, because I don't because it's not right to steal money from people and use guns to ban it and create a black market and create, a war on drugs 2.0 on fucking porn and increase sex trafficking and all this other shit. I know there's a long-winded answer, but I had to
you're good.
Give it a foundation.
That's where I really find the most joy personally, is because I'm a bit of a problem solver. I like the puzzle of it all. I like the complexity of trying to solve a problem that most people just knee-jerk react to and just say, hey, the state, we'll just use that. Make a law. We should ban it. We should, and it becomes much more enlightening to try to think, okay, well, if I don't have that tool at my disposal, then what? How do we actually do it? Well, that forces, at least it forces me to start thinking about root causes rather than trying to play whack-a-mole with all these symptoms we constantly see popping up in society that constantly become the social media. Everything starts going crazy on social media because we're all talking about, oh, there's this immediate thing in our purview that we must address, and we got to come up with some law. And it's like, guys, this is a problem that's been multiple steps in the making that we need. It'll never get solved by just pointing a gun at it. So what do we do? It's more so just trying to retrain your brain. And that's, for me, that's what I'm trying to do, is retrain people's brains to start thinking outside the box. Hey, if you can't aggress against people, if you can't, say spank your kid because that's violates the non-aggression principle, well, what is the alternatives? What else can you do? And it's been quite the journey, and I'm wondering how you tackle that. How do you go about bringing up these concepts to people and in such a way that they're like, oh, okay, I could kind of see that, or how do you introduce the problem solving aspect of it? I think that's the question. Let's go with that.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things here to pick apart. So number one, I tend to look at, specifically when we're talking about political strategy in the state, is a recognition of like order of operations, right? It's like, you guys, like, to the audience out there, you guys remember when you learned PEMDAS, right? It's like you got to do the things in the parentheses first. And that's kind of how we have to approach dismantling the state. Right. It's like we have to recognize that the entire state is a web of interconnected programs and NGOs and all these other things. And so, we have to recognize that if we're going to do specifically the praxis against the state has to be done carefully. One of the worst examples of libertarianism put into practice in political or in legal terms was the abolishing of drugs in the state of Washington. That was probably the worst way to do it we could possibly do it. And the way that we did it is we decriminalized drug usage and possession of drugs. And then we didn't change anything else. Horrible order of operations.
And then everybody stands back and goes, okay, look, it clearly didn't work. So your ideas are bunk.
Right. And it's like, well, why was that so bad? Well, there was two major problems with that. Number one is decriminalization of possession is not decriminalization altogether. It means that selling drugs is still illegal, and it means that businesses are incapable of actually going into the market. So it's still a black market, or you could call it a gray market. So a business isn't capable of advertising the safety of their product. A business isn't capable of, giving a drug out, but doing it in safe places. A business isn't capable of creating an app that allows you to rate your drug dealer so that you don't get fentanyl, right? Like there's a million possibilities that the free market is able to provide that are shackled and reined in by the state. The second is that the greatest evil of the state, the worst evil of the state, is not the military. It's not bombing children. It's not taxation. It's the existence of public property. That is it is the hardest to see, most insidious portion of the state, is because it is the essence of conflict created and maintained by the state. Because conflict.
I'm interested in that. I don't see it that way, but I'm willing to be schooled on it. Right. I'm not really sure what you mean by that.
So a system of ethics is justifiable if it is conflict reducing, right? If it has a pathway to resolve conflict peacefully. And if you read Hans Hermann Hoppe's Argumentation Ethics, right, you will recognize that attempting to justify taxation or these other things comes into a performative contradiction. It gets really complicated, but basically, you recognize people's bodily autonomy and then you argue for taxation, kind of falling into a contradiction, right? So, well, but what is this concept of conflict and why is it so important? Is that what conflict is when two or more people want to utilize scarce resources towards opposing means, right? So I have a glass of water and then I want to drink this glass of water, but you also want to drink this glass of water. Well, now we have a conflict because only one of us can actually drink this glass of water. Maybe we talk about it and we share, right? And like you drink from one, I drink, and then you waterfall. But let's say we can't come to an agreement.
Or you could shotgun it, or you could shotgun it to me later on after you're done, switching it around.
Yeah. Maybe we come to some agreement, right?
That'd be fun.
But how do we share the water? Okay. Well, the problem is if we can't come to an agreement, then we have to have some system that says this water is mine. Well, that's what private property rights are. That's what private property is. It says that in the absence of us being able to talk it out, somebody is the owner of this property. And once we establish who that is, we can resolve the conflict by saying, no, this is my glass of water. This is my cup. I own this cup. You don't own this cup. Now, public property, socialism, communism, these are all systems, or Nazism, fascism. These are all systems that say, actually, private property doesn't really exist. Some of them will pretend like it exists to a certain domain, but there are limits. And what they will say
like
that,
your toothbrush and stuff like that. Yeah.
Right. And so what they say is that what they do is in order to reduce this problem, they say we'll use violence to resolve this. We'll impose rules, or we'll impose mob rule through democracy. We'll have a vote on it and we'll determine. And then so that is in and of itself conflict inducing, right? If 51% agree to some certain set of rules, 49% lose. There is no conflict resolution for them.
And they're
simply
powerless
slaves.
to do it. Yeah, and they're powerless to do anything about it. And there's there goes your incentive to even try to build anything.
So what is public property except the purest expression of this concept, which is the lie that multiple people can have exclusive control over scarce resources. That's what a public park is. That's what a public school is. That's what a public road is. So the moment we instituted drug legalization, we saw heroin addicts dropping needles at kids' playgrounds. We saw druggies on the side of the streets in what should be clean, safe neighborhoods. We saw, people just trying to go to the gas station and they have to deal with clouds of weed smoke and explain to their kids what's going on. By creation of public property, what we create is that conflict. Some people want to take their kids to a park and not have heroin needles. And some people want to go into a room somewhere and do heroin. It is only when we have a private property owner that says, no druggies on my property, or says this is a clean place to do drugs, that we resolve that conflict. And so
that's the arena where you get to ban things, like you said before, in your earlier example, without violating the NAP, right?
You're not violating anybody's rights if you have you have a privately owned park and you let people come to your park and maybe you charge them, or maybe you have advertisements on the side of the park. Maybe you have a hot dog stand. However you choose to make money in your park, right? You're not violating anybody's rights when you say no homeless vagrants here and no drug addicts. But when you have public property, everyone is supposed to have access to this scarce resource, and everybody wants to use this scarce resource differently. Some people want to go fishing in the pond. Some people want to have a picnic. Some people just want a quiet place to sleep, because they're homeless. All of these different people want to do different things, and conflict arises because all these different people want to do different things with this property. It doesn't seem like it's that evil, but it is the greatest expression of evil. Public property.
I can see it, and some people would like to build a house in that beautiful property, but can't because it's
absolutely.
So that does remind me.
And that's why drug legalization failed, right? It's because of public property. There's all the existence of public property created all of this conflict between people that wanted to do drugs and have a drug culture, and people that wanted a clean neighborhood where their kids could run around. There's a conflict here, and once we open and so before that, the state was acting kind of like a private property owner. They were keeping the degenerates and the weirdos away from public spaces that are meant to be family pro-social places. And then when we get rid of that, all of those all of those places we open the floodgates to people that want to use them in ways that most people probably don't like. And it's not the drug legalization that's a problem. It's the existence of public property that is the problem.
Holy crap.
So this is the Jenga thing I'm talking about.
Yeah. This is part of the complex puzzle that I'm talking about. It's like, once you start pulling it pieces, you're like, okay, so that also reminds me, and I'll pop it up on the screen and post before I post on the channel, but there was a map I saw that blew my mind, and I'm like, because it showed on the American map how much of it is owned by the government. And I mean, I knew it was a lot. I knew it was a lot. And if I had to estimate, I would have said, I don't know, 10% of the overall United States is probably public parks. And holy crap, it's like 50%.
It's like 40%.
It is a lot. And then people are wondering why our property values are so high. Well, because we're all forced into one, much smaller areas that we can even grab property from. So that creates its whole issues on its own. And then it's just at some point, I don't know if, like I said, I'm gonna pop it up here on screen so people could see it for themselves. But when I saw it like actually visually represented, it just blew my mind. I was like, this is a huge problem, way worse than I even thought. And then on top of that, we've got the issue with which I'm just now learning about, is China taking some of the surplus funds from our tariffs and whatnot that they had, and then going back and buying property here in the United States. It's like, now that leaves even less property for us, and then we're constantly fighting over. Of course, we're fighting over it, in the form of price, but the prices have gotten so ridiculous, so high, and like people are more and more becoming, is at least the younger crowd is becoming more and more black pill.
Property values, property values is like 30 different reasons of state intervention that it's so high. Like there's no univariate analysis that says this is why property values are high, right? Like people blame like BlackRock or something, and this is the socialist go-to answer is like, corporations and landlords buying up a bunch of property. It's like 40% of properties that exist are owned by someone that owns more than one piece of property. So, in some domain, they're a landlord, but it's only like 2% that are owned by hedge funds. Most of it is like your grandmother died and then she passed her house on to you, and then you already owned a house. So now you have two houses, right? Like that's the vast majority of that 40%. And then the other, like another like 10 or 15% is people get rich. And what's the best way to make money in our fucked up governmental tax system is to have assets and then get loans off of the assets and hope that the loan interest rate approaches the inflation rate of the United States dollar. And then you can basically kind of just like keep printing money now that you're one of the rich people without having to pay a significant portion in taxes. And so that's one government problem, right? Then you have, you brought up like the Chinese coming in. Well, there's nothing wrong with Chinese people buying up property. I'm all for it. Buy up all the property you want. What is wrong is anti-discrimination laws. I ought to be able to have a neighborhood that says no blacks allowed, or no Chinese allowed, or no Irish need apply, or whatever it is.
And the fact that that's such a weird thing to hear someone say is wild to me, because I'm like, if I will go to a restaurant, for example, and it says no blacks allowed, I'm probably not gonna. I'm not gonna eat there. That's fine. They can, but I'm not gonna stop them from like what good is it gonna do me trying to force them to serve everyone? I'm like, that's forced association. That's violation of our basic constitution, and nobody even bats an eye.
Right. I mean, but there's also there's a lot of NIMBY laws not in my backyard, right? There's a lot of places where their real estate could very easily become high-rise apartment buildings. But wealthy people enact laws that keep people from building apartment buildings because they want their nice gated community neighborhoods. And then the apartments can go in some fucked up area. Well, what does that do? Well, it puts all the poor people into one area, right? And then those areas become homogenous with low socioeconomic status people. Well, what does that cause? That causes crime. That causes breakdown of culture. That causes, all of the poor to be shuffled into one area. That causes labor and people that have to live there to have to be able to either get public transport or, a car or something to go to their job, because obviously poor people are needed to work everywhere, not just in the poor area. So it's like, that's a major cost for a lot of things, right? That causes more than just property value going up. There's quantitative easing that the Federal Reserve does, asset inflation when the economy takes a downturn because they refuse to admit the Austrian business cycle is true. So they just, pump money into the housing market, which makes the rich richer and makes the poor less and less able to afford homes. I mean, there's like a 20, 30, like I said, there's like 30, 40 different reasons why housing is a problem. And almost all of it is the government.
It drives me nuts when I do projects. I do a little home remodeling. When I do projects for people, sometimes they have a really hard time visualizing what it is. We're having to communicate and figure out what this visualization is. So sometimes I got to draw it out for them, and that's a pretty simple thing. I want the deck to look like this. But when I'm trying to describe complex ideas, it's easy for me because I've been in it so long. Over a decade now, I can visualize what that society might look like if you take the long arm of the government out of everything and just let people do what they're going to do. And I'm not scared of the consequences of that, as long as we do it kind of methodically and don't like snap. We can't snap our fingers, obviously, but it's really frustrating trying to communicate that idea to, just even my own brother, for example. We get into debates all the time. He thinks Elon Musk is the worst person to ever walk the face of the earth. And I'm like, maybe some ways, but mostly not. I don't know. So
I'll give you a tip with family.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to forget it. I'll give you a tip with family. And this is for everybody with family.
That's where I was heading anyway, because those are the people we interact with the most. And when you're trying to explain these complex ideas to people, you kind of want your closest circle to at least understand you. They may not agree with you, but at least understand you, right?
The best way to deal with close friends and family is, and this is something I borrowed from Michael Malice, who I used to like before he just became like a fucking simp for whoever will go on this podcast. But talk to them about what they believe is happening. Talk to them about their worldview. Respect them. Don't call them stupid. Don't talk down to them. Come from a place of respect and love. And after they give you their worldview, I want you to ask them a very simple question. Okay. This is what you believe is happening. When will they go too far? What is too far for you? And make them tell you what too far is. Yeah. And then come back to that conversation a year later. Because in a year or 2 years, depending on what they picked, you can go, remember that thing that you said was too far? Here's 3 news articles of them doing that thing that you said was too far.
Yeah.
So can we have a conversation now? And that's how you broach that up, is that you have to find a way to break the cognitive dissonance, and nobody knows what will break their own cognitive dissonance than the person themselves. So if you make them say, okay, here's my line, whatever that line is, you can revisit that conversation once that line's been crossed, because they will be, if you treat them with love and respect, and you just respect that their opinions are different, and you make them say what that is. If you come back to them 2 or 3 years later and be like, hey, remember when you said this was your line? Here's 3 examples of it happening. They will be so much more open because they knew that you knew. And they know they were wrong, and they're humbled, and they can be vulnerable and sit in a place of humility because you loved and respected them, as opposed to constantly chastising them, trying to break their cognitive dissonance. There's a wonderful speech by Abraham Lincoln in his temperance address. This is before he's elected president, right? And he talks about this concept, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically says, if you approach someone like your enemy, like they'll harden their hearts, whatever, and it's like, but if you talk to them like a friend, and you show them that like you can love and respect them, et cetera, et cetera. And he says, it doesn't matter what logic you use, even though you throw your arguments with more Herculean strength, and even though, it'd be a lance that is harder than steel can be made, it'll be no different than trying to pierce a tortoise's back with a rye straw. Like people will just harden themselves to it.
Yeah. The strong arguments, the sound arguments, the, perfect case doesn't seem to register at all. And
none of that
I think
exists.
yeah, and fortunately, like for example, my brother and I, we get along really well. We have a great relationship, and we talk. And that's beautiful that we can talk about these things. I know there's a lot of families that are way farther down the path and that just hate each other. That
That's good. Yeah.
Cannot have these conversations. But our whole family is cool. We're just like, we get in these little debates sometimes, and they're a lot of fun. But I don't know about you, but I have decided that the only people that I will just out and out laugh at are flat earthers. They get a special exception, but most people I'm patient with. So I try to take my time with most other people on their ideas, because I get that they've been indoctrinated into these ideas and stuff. So you can't reason someone out of an idea that weren't reasoned into. But
I actually find flat earthers to be less problematic than normies.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
Whenever you find somebody that has come to grips with a conspiracy, you found someone that was partially waking up to the fact that our society is a house of cards built on lies, and they couldn't deal with it, so they gravitated towards some worldview or something that they could obsess over. And so if you can break someone out of something like flat earth or white nationalism or some of these like really harebrained places, they're far more likely to be something like an ANCAP or a libertarian or really see the world than like a normie, because a normie already has a popular opinion.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, and I agree to a point.
But flat earthers are crazy.
But
so let's laugh.
Right. Most of the people that I've had just shut me out completely were flat earthers. The people that were like just completely hate me because I'm just, and it's not like I was being an asshole to begin with. It's always like, hey, what about this and this and this? And they're like like nothing penetrates at all. And I've actually had people unfriend me in real life over this stuff. And in my experience with flat earthers,
it's happening in Tennessee, boys.
So there's an interesting phenomenon. I don't know if you've seen this or can affirm this or not, but what I've noticed is I think flat earth is to the right what they, them, and pronouns are to the left. And let me explain what I mean by that. I mean, there's a certain personality type that I've noticed among these folks that they've had their boundaries violated so egregiously, especially in their coming up through childhood and stuff, that they create they end up creating these identities where you don't have boundaries. Like the boundaries that are typically set and societally accepted and whatnot just don't exist at all. And you have this phenomena of they, them, where they're like, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm kind of nothing, I'm in between, I'm floating. And just, I don't know, I'm still trying to formulate the idea, but in general, what I've noticed is when I talk to these people on a deeper level, I've noticed there is some pretty egregious violations of their person. I'm talking molestation, I'm talking physical abuse, I'm talking neglect, that kind of thing. Some really heinous stuff has gone on, and without exception, every single one of them I've talked to, this has been the case. And I don't know if there's something to that or not. I could be just, it could be just my own anecdotes that I've ran into, but I've been, I interact with people on the left and the right as a from my position. So I kind of get a little bit more of a sense of what these things are having. I don't know if you've noticed anything like that or not, or if that's something I can just kind of throw out there. I don't want
to psychologize it too much, because like, mostly because I'll get real off topic, because I went to counseling. I went to grad school for counseling. My background is in that. That's actually where, hilariously enough, you would think with my background and how much I've read that I'd be like some pop psychology streamer, but as an ANCAP, that's where I really went down. That's what I end up talking about. Right. Yeah, I mean, when you have trauma, you kind of one or two things happens. Either you're mentally resilient or it's mental resiliency. Right? It's hard to know, but some group of people kind of harden, they close off, but they grin and bear it, kind of, if you will. Right.
Right.
And obviously, you have these things called ACEs, which is adverse childhood event. Right. So it's kind of a stacking effect, an exponential effect, where like one bad thing is all right, two bad things is way worse than one bad thing times two, kind of. So like I don't disagree.
just to
Go ahead.
throw the ACE score of the guy that I'm specifically thinking of, the flat earther. I'm talking to the level where his mother had him tried to have him exercised by flame when he was younger. Like pretty
Yeah. Yeah, I mean
dark
that's one of
stuff.
those ones where you really only need that one. It probably comes with a bunch of other ones though, if you get to that
Yeah,
point, anyways.
I think there's a certain boundary violation that happens, a certain level of distrust that happens that just extends. It makes you more susceptible to these ideas, like, oh, well, I can't trust that either. And I get where it comes from. I get where it's born out of distrust for the societal structures and what the people have been telling us and everything else. And I just I don't know. It's something I've been enjoying playing with, and just I don't know if anybody else is watching this and kind of has seen that or noticed that, but just a fun idea to play with that I haven't heard anybody else speak on.
Yeah, I mean,
But
so there's something to be so from the rights domain, I won't like again, I don't want to psychologize it too much, but you do have
sure.
schizoaffective disorder and things of that nature. And the more we learn about cluster psychology, right? So your cluster A's, your cluster B's, your cluster C's. And we'll talk about cluster B's specifically when we talk about the left. Now, when we talk about like cluster C's and cluster A's, these things can occur kind of in a spectrum, right? Like, it started off that every mental disorder was like, this is the mental disorder, you have it or you don't, right? And then autism kind of broke through, and we were like, okay, well, there's all these different types of autism. So maybe it's a spectrum, right? Certain people have certain traits. Some people have other traits. Other people don't have other traits. For example, my son is nonverbal autistic. Well, he's nonverbal, but he's unaffected by sounds or texture. So in a lot of ways, he's better off than a lot of verbal autistic people, right? Like people that are weird, but they can speak and they can talk and they communicate, and he barely communicates. But like I can feed him any food, it's not going to freak him out. I can take him to a loud place, he's not going to freak out. Whereas like there are plenty of people that can talk, right? So like it's really like it's a shotgun of traits, right? And so this, it wouldn't surprise me that trauma and personality disorders, right? Because that's really what we're talking about, is the whole domain of personality disorders. And so when you talk about having a stable personality that develops, that allows you to kind of engage in the world, what you are essentially talking about in terms of the development of personality is when you are young, you take in and garner information from the world that contextualizes your own feelings and allows you to match your feelings with reality. And so let's say you fall down and you hit your head and you have two loving parents. Okay. If you hit your head on the corner of a table and it's really loud, your dad and your mom both come to you and they both go, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And they give you love and they give you affection and they give you empathy and they give you concern. And this allows you to go, "Ooh, that was really bad." Now, the next thing that happens is you fall down, but you don't hit your head, you just fall down. But it's loud and it hurts a little bit and you cry. Mom comes to you, but dad goes, "He'll be fine."
Yeah.
That's a new piece of information that goes, okay, this is bad, maybe, but maybe it's not that bad. Maybe it's not that big of a deal, right? And maybe I should get over this. Maybe I should learn to fight back against this and push this down because it's not appropriate to scream and cry all the time.
Yeah.
And then
dad
another time,
dad doesn't seem to be panicking, so it's probably fine.
Right. And then, last example would be you stub your toe and you're like, "Ow." And then you wait for it and people are like, "Hurry up and get to dinner." Nobody cares. Right. And then you're like, okay, nobody cares because it's not a big deal. Now, same scenario. What happens when you take a parent away? Now you only have one piece of information. And now you have a woman that is really attached to you, probably a woman, right? That maybe overreacts
Statistically,
more often than not. Right. And so your information, your ability to map your, the engaging with empathy and your feelings and map them out appropriately to the world is stunted in your development. Now imagine you have two parents, but one of them is extremely abusive and the information you get from them is sporadic. Sometimes you hit your head and mom doesn't care because she hates you. And then sometimes you stub your toe and mom really, really cares because she's neurotic and overreacting. Now you're getting false data, not just a lack of data. And so this is kind of mostly, that's a really 1,000-foot bird's eye view of like how we kind of hypothesize personality disorders developing over time that change the way that you engage that information. So I don't think you're necessarily too wrong to think about, schizoaffective and psychotic and not necessarily the full disorder, but traits like that in places like Flat Earth, where their ability to socialize and integrate their ideas with reality and their care, which is no man is an island, to be accepted and to keep the quiet thoughts that are kind of retarded, in the head, right? Like all of those breakdowns occur.
Now, like Anarchy in 2025.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about the they thems, we are almost certainly talking about covert, vulnerable, narcissistic personality disorder. So as opposed to grandiose narcissistic personality, this is a cluster B. Cluster B means they're all together. So antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, which you see more of in the trans community. But one of the things that you'll see when you look into the data is that we have really, really good data on trans people. Why do we have really good data on trans people? And they lie all the time and say have really bad data on them. We have better data on them than we have in any other demographic in the world. And the reason is because in a lot of countries, if you want to get hormones, you have to go to a clinic, which means we have 100% capture rate on every single person in those countries that gets any form of medication, which would be either hormone replacement therapy, unless they're going through the black market. So we actually have incredibly good data on them. And what you will find is when we study personality disorders in the trans community, what we find is somewhere between 70 to 80% of them have a cluster B personality disorder, with most of them being. Now, it's the Iranian study says 70%. There's a Spain study that says like 55%. There's some studies that suggest 30%.
Still incredible. How does that compare to the general population?
Just the highest estimates you'll ever find is probably 4%.
That sounds more like, and then in politics, probably double that.
Yeah, or rich CEOs probably have some narcissism or something like that. Sure. But again, it's a spectrum. There's traits. Now, there's a lot of people that are uncaptured, right? Which they have unspecific personality disorder, cluster B. But it is my hypothesis that it is covert vulnerable personality disorder, which is a new form of NPD. And I'll tell you what it is, and you tell me if this doesn't sound like every they, them trans person you've ever heard. Mm-hmm. What it is it is a feeling that I am a special victim, that everyone must adhere to my victim status, or they are actually perpetrators of why my life is bad. I am a special person, and nobody really understands just how special I am. Anyone that doesn't affirm my specialness is an enemy that I need to be malicious against, and I need to use power against, and I need to excise them from my life. If someone isn't willing to affirm my identity and my special victim status, and all of the problems in my life are actually tied to this identity, it's not that I'm lazy, it's not any of these other things. I'm not going to take any accountability. But if someone won't do that, it doesn't matter if they're friends or family, they need to be cut off. And I need to find other people and use and manipulate them in some domains so that they attach to this. My failure in school, my failure in grades. It is what they, thems are. They're like the comparing of your typical trans they, them to a fucking NPD covert vulnerable are damn near 1-to-1. So I don't think your theory is that far off. But I do think it's more an interesting hypothesis on the flat Earth. We don't have enough data for me to be able to draw anything from that, but it is certainly a thing with the they thems.
So that does sound like the final boss of a they them is where they ultimately end up. It does explain quite a bit, actually, but I think part of it is they actually are victims, and at some point they just fully embrace that victimhood personality type and end up.
Yeah, I mean, like that's why I described how a personality type, arrives, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I talked to Chloe Cole, years ago.
Which just to finish, I do feel bad for them. I'm not saying I'm just like totally cold hearted to them, but at some point, like, what do you like? There's only so much you can do. My daughter, who happens to be a lesbian, was dating one of these girls who went by they them, and that's where I got a lot of the information about how she came up, and it's just wild to see. A lot of
some of it's a fad. Some of it's a fad. Some of it is
for sure.
For sure. Some of it's fad. Some of it's that. But the answer is not cult like in group collectivist things like discords where they isolate people from their parents, and they find young people and they call them eggs because they've yet to crack into their trans identity, and going no contact with your parents, and utilizing the ACA and the APA and school system to give power towards people that always push them towards a treatment route that there's absolutely no evidence suggests actually comes with better outcomes, because even post surgery, post that period where you're supposed to pass, post treatment, transgender population has a higher suicidality rate than do Jews under Nazi occupation. Wow. And so the idea that society is causing this problem because we don't accept them means that they're less accepted than Jews under Nazi occupation, which is fucking retarded. Like the answer is truth and reality. And yeah, I think there are some quote unquote true trans people. I think there are people like Buck Angel but they're a drop in the bucket compared to our current degeneracy and chemical castration and destruction that we're going through.
And to add what you just said is the love bombing that comes along with associating yourself with those communities, and as well that feel good oxytocin hormone and all that crap you get with it.
There's a lot of cult like stuff.
It's another Jenga. It's another Jenga block. Yeah.
If you want to learn more about it, I did a whole conversation about it with Benjamin Boyce, just about trans and covert vulnerable narcissistic personality disorder.
I fully did not expect to go down this path. I'm glad we did, because this stuff fascinates me. I'm always interested in the psychology about why people believe what they believe rather than what they actually believe, because what they believe doesn't often comport with how they actually act in the world. It turns out most people I've noticed, they act very differently from how they say they believe, which is interesting to watch.
As a libertarian, we believe in the theory of human action, right? So their actions actually prove how they believe.
100%. So I want to go a slightly different direction here. The guy that I do the Patriot Punkcast with here, he and I get in these discussions about anarchy all the time, and he's more the small government libertarian type, and I don't know, he just hasn't quite let go of the governments. Yes, I'm ribbing him a little bit right now, but one of the questions that he wanted me to pose to you, and something that he's kind of formulated, was the idea that each individual 50 states does represent what an anarchic society would look like. It kind of is the ultimate form of anarchy in his estimation, in that they each are kind of their own little microcosms of society and whatnot. I would argue they don't go quite small enough. They do have some semblance to it, but I'm just curious kind of how that sounds to you when I throw that idea out there. How would you respond to that?
There's a joke in my community, which is what's the difference between an anarchist and a minarchist?
What's that?
6 months.
Okay. This is the same with the conspiracy theorists.
Just 6 months
that way.
You know what I mean? It's like, look, once you're kind of already there and you're accepting 90% of the thing, you're kind of already seeing reality. And so, just give it 6 months, but all jokes aside, look, I don't disagree that more localization of laws leads towards a more, a more accurate legal system for the values of the individuals that are inherent in that place. But ultimately, as you said, I don't want, 50 states. I want 1,000 Liechtensteins. And ultimately, like I'm in Virginia right now, right? And so the idea that Virginia represents Nova, which is a bunch of government employees and lawyers, and Richmond and Virginia Beach and coal miners in Appalachia, where my family comes from, that fight wars over ginseng, are somehow all the same people, is wild, right? Like that's wild.
Yeah, that's hell of a varied population, and that's just a small portion of the overall United States.
Right. And that's so I don't disagree that Virginia is going to be better than the federal government at recognizing issues that are special or specific to Virginia, right? I mean, we can take that even further when we look at something like Alaska, right? Like, I don't disagree that, Alaskans understand Alaska better than Washington fucking DC does. But it is
nobody understands Californians.
Yeah, right. So it's literally just a step closer, but it's many steps removed, right? Like it's just like, if you want an example of an anarchist society in America, then look at the Beachy Amish, right? Like that's what an actual anarchist society looks like. I don't disagree that there will be large places where people kind of choose to live under a pseudo state for comfort.
Sure.
But that is very different than one that imposes itself upon me and has a monopoly on power and violence.
The difference between doing it by choice versus against your will. Yeah, for sure. I'm cool with that. That's one of the things I've been talking to a lot of people about. It's like, hey, I think society, if it's going to actually operate, will kind of look like a little bit what the right looks like and a little bit what the left wants. It's going to be a little mix of both, and it's going to be more in one area and less in one area. It's just going to be a varied mix of a little bit of everything. And if you're just not happy where you're at, it's going to be a lot easier to pick up and move to another area than it currently is. It's just almost impossible to move out of wherever you're at, because you're still going to be faced with the same laws 3 states away for the most part. It's not that different. But
yeah, I don't know. On that domain, who knows? Maybe it'll be harder, right? But it'll be voluntary, and that will mean that it was efficient. Yeah. Over time, you run that game enough, it just means that it was better that way, and we were just wrong in our intuition.
Yeah, there's one of the another slight change of topic here is the regulations, and I know we brought this up a couple of times, is regulations in general. One of the biggest concerns I get is well, without the government, how do we regulate this XYZ? And one of the things that I constantly say is something about privatizing regulation. Is there a model that you've heard of that maybe you can explain that would make sense to people in terms of how we might actually handle, I don't know, not poisoning the air or not, doing, microplastics in our food or, whatever the case is? Is there a model that you've heard of that has been described, or one that you've even come up with that might be able to solve those problems for people?
This is where libertarians often fail, because so many of us are very logos centered, very autistic in the way that we communicate ideas. Right. And this is where I think sometimes you have to use a little bit of pathos, a little bit of energeia. You have to tell a story, and you have to kind of engage in a thought experiment. Right. So I'll give you 2 examples. One's really long, and then the second one will be really fucking short. So example number 1 is,
it's short when you have to drop an F-bomb in the middle of it just to make it longer.
Well, it might just be, it might be that short just in relativity to how long-winded and verbose I am in the first one. I'll try and clean it up a little bit. But the Food and Drug Administration exists. And many people would say, well, we need the Food and Drug Administration. But the problem is there's a lot of problems. But the problem stems from the fact that it is a monopoly on the rights of what food and drugs can be sold in this country. So let's look at the Food and Drug Administration and see if we really like this program, and then do a little thought experiment against its alternative. So Food and Drug Administration is one of the biggest players in the opioid epidemic, without a doubt. Food and Drug Administration was bought and paid for by Purdue Pharmacy in creating a new type of label that was based on fraud for Purdue Pharmacy that made disingenuous claims that OxyContin was a less addictive substance than other opioids. It was not. They were allowed to get a drug label that made a lie that told all of the doctors in America a complete falsity. And those doctors, many of whom didn't care because they got money, but many of whom initially trusted the FDA, trusted these labelings, trusted the data and the science and the people that do this for a living that said, this is less addictive. This is a miracle drug. And then they went into Appalachia, and they went into Pennsylvania, and they spread OxyContin everywhere they could, giving it to coal miners. And that is one of the big reasons that these places are completely devastated. And my own family is, devastated to the point where I've lost 1 to drug overdose and 2 to suicide from opioid epidemic. So, I have a lot of hatred for the Food and Drug Administration, just in that domain. But let's take it out of that one fuck up, right? 25% of all drugs that are placed on the market that are made, given the thumbs up by the FDA are recalled. 25%.
25%. Is that all?
25% of drugs that go to market are later recalled. So obviously they're not. So 1 out of every 4 fucking drugs that Americans are taking is a drug that something is wrong with it to such a degree that it needs to be taken off of the market because it's too dangerous to give to people. That's a problem. That's a huge fucking problem. Let's look at example number 3 within the FDA. When we had a factory not under the Biden administration that produced baby formula. And this factory was linked to 4 deaths of infants from a type of bacteria that was later discovered at the factory. Oof, maybe the FDA dropped the ball here. Well, it turns out we did an investigation. And what we found is that the 4 dead babies in question lived in absolute squalor, that their houses were full of roaches, their entire house was infested with bacteria and disease. And when we looked at the factory, the bacteria in question was found in a place on a bacteria floor somewhere, not actually in the food supply at all, and that they did a deep clean, and the FDA kept them closed for 3 months after they had completely cleaned the factory. Now, this factory was one of 4 major factories in the production of baby formula in the United States. And on top of that was the only factory for a couple types of formula for babies with certain food allergens. So what were we going to do? Well, the FDA and the CDC and the Biden administration kept the factory closed. They kept it closed for months and months and months. And all of a sudden we had a baby formula shortage. Remember there was baby formula shortage?
I remember that. And they had to
from this.
They had to look like they were doing something. So, I mean, obviously the logical solution is to shut down the factory, right?
And then the logical solution was to bring the factory back online, but only for those specific products for those babies with food allergens. So the factory was safe for those babies, but not safe for anyone else because the government wanted to get a nice check that as they went through legal issues. So they kept the factory closed for another 2 months. That's 5 months of one of 4 major facilities. And so how did the government solve this shortage? Well, instead of going to the Food and Drug Administration and saying, you know how it's illegal to import all of these products from Europe that don't have corn syrup in them because the corn lobby and big farming agricultural lobby has used tons and tons of money to purchase you off so that you can't legally get baby formula from Europe, which is safer and held to higher standards, right?
More Jenga blocks.
Right. We're instead of the FDA getting out of the way and deregulating and allowing safer formula to come into the market, what the Biden administration did is they got a couple of Connexes and airplanes and went to a Nestle factory in Sweden and purchased with U.S. taxpaying dollars a whole bunch of baby formula and then put that baby formula in grocery stores, which, by the way, is the same baby formula that they slapped a new label on that is illegal in the United States because the FDA keeps it illegal in the United States because the big agricultural companies that push a bunch of soy and a bunch of corn syrup into our products. So when I say, I give you all of that information about the Food and Drug Administration, and I say, well, what's the ANCAP alternative? My answer is 3 or 4 companies competing that give information to doctors that they pay a subscription service to, and you trust your fucking doctor, and you allow companies to compete. And I'm pretty sure companies will get closer than 75% win rate on whether or not a drug is bad for you. That's my super long example. My super short example is Prospera Honduras exists. It is already an anarcho-capitalist community. Its economy is primarily 2 things: tourism and pharmaceutical industry getting that have labs and research where they can get away from regulations that are overburdensome in the rest of the world. You pay a 5% tax. Everybody can live. You can pay $3,000 and become a citizen. It is already an ANCAP community, with the exception of the fact that they have to pay a small tax percentage to Honduras based off of a UN treaty. And and when you go there, you sign up for a rights enforcement agency, and that an insurance company that protects your rights. All of the competing rights enforcement agency insurance companies have decided collectively that there will be no level 4 biolabs in Prospera Honduras because it's not worth the risk. Level 4 biolabs like the one in the Wuhan Institute of Virology that totally didn't create COVID, or the ones that were on the border of Ukraine and Russia that were made by Black and Vetch, and a bunch of funny money got moved to Hunter Biden that totally didn't happen.
Nope, never heard of those either. Yeah.
Our own government funds with taxpayer dollars level 4 biolabs, and we're supposed to say these are the guys that are keeping us safe because regulations are good. But when the free market in an anarcho-capitalist society exists, exists. All of the insurance companies say that they refuse to build level 4 biolabs because the danger isn't profitable enough because the risk is too high.
Excellent answer. I appreciate you going into the detail on that. That's a hell of a long explanation and a short explanation for why regulations need to be privatized. And I think once people can start at least thinking outside the box and thinking about, okay, well, without the state, without the government, how do we actually solve? It's just such a simple question. It's such a simple question that I don't
such a
think enough
complicated
people,
answer.
well, yeah. I mean, it is a complicated answer, but it's a simple question, and it's scary. That's the number one thing that I've ran into is people are just scared. They're scared of what a society would look like without what they're used to being there. And most of the answers I get come out of fear of XYZ. That's it. That's pretty much the whole of it for me.
The state has indoctrinated people into thinking that when the state gives a regulation, that experts are in charge and that what they'll do is what they plan on doing. The state has completely ignored unintended consequences, which occur with almost every state action. And so what the normie hears is the unknown free market will fix it and regulate itself. That's really scary. I want the experts in charge and the experts that actually know what they're doing, that have my safety in interest, will fix it. But they don't understand unintended consequences. And more importantly, they don't understand the economic calculation problem under Austrian economic theory.
It's also,
which is they can't.
It's basically the mind. Yeah, it's basically the mindset. If I can't dream up a solution doesn't exist. But I tend to trust my fellow man. I tend to find people in general really smart, actually, and able to solve their own
I think my fellow man is retarded, and that's why I want anarcho-capitalism. Because I think real experts will emerge in the domains of their own property, as opposed to a bunch of idiots voting for people like Trump and Kamala Harris.
All right, Scott, it's been an absolute pleasure having spoke with you today. I'm really glad that we were able to finally get this done. I look forward to maybe doing another one in the future on maybe some current events or something like that. But is there anything else that you would like to tell the audience before we wrap up today? Maybe like where to find you and all that good happy crap.
Yeah, it was like a billion things. I'm sorry I'm so long-winded, and that's just because I'm passionate. And it's very rare that you get to have good conversations. Most of my content.
That was my job as the host to rein you in. I long-winded is fine as long as it's engaging and interesting, and I can kind of tell when I start kind of zoning out. And I have a short attention span, so you did great. You did great. I don't mind the long-winded explanations.
Yeah, I'm just apologizing before the comments come in that are like, who brought on this fucking like, oh my God. But anyways, if you're interested in what I said, or you want to see debates, I do a lot of debates online. And I do, interviews and discussions, and sometimes we just game. I'm a streamer. I'm not like a video creator. So you'll see like 6-hour streams. Just hop in sometime, ask some questions. I always answer super chats. So feel free to just pop in and see what we're about. You can find me basically just Google Fabian Liberty. You'll find my YouTube channel and my X account, or Zitter, or Twitter, or whatever the kids are calling it these days.
Excellent. Man, I appreciate you coming on. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, you said you're streaming this. I can be found on all social media platforms at Unframe of Mind. I post most of my spicy stuff over on X platform. I try to be a little bit more friendly to the normies over on Facebook, but I'm over there too. So with that being said, I'll let you off the hook, and
thank you.
Appreciate you for coming on, man. All right. Later. All right. There you go. So let me know what you think, and if anybody would like to reach out to Mr. Liberty or Mr. Scott there, please absolutely do. He's a wealth of information, a lot of interesting stuff he's got going on there. And if you want to listen to that episode of Timcast he was on, it was a lot of fun to listen to, for sure. I love those heated, passionate debates, so I fully recommend going and listening to that particular episode as well. So with that being said, this has been another episode of the Unframe of Mind show, where we have uncomfortable conversations without a condom. I'm your host, Daniel Wagner. Until next time.